Hello, everyone. I'm going to do or share some thoughts on a CNN program about Patty Hearst, who was the heiress to a media mogul's empire and the daughter of a publisher of a prominent newspaper. Now, she wound up being kidnapped, and robbing banks and whatnot, and there was a question about whether she did this willingly after being kidnapped or not. The person who created this documentary said that they would present the information and let the viewers decide. Now, at one point, and I know I'm not going to always be perfectly chronological. I didn't take notes like I often have in the past, but I'll try to be as coherent as I can. But let's see, what was I? Oh, at one point she had said that she was doing what she did on her own and that she was not being forced. Now, oddly enough, there's a CD set by Anthony Robbins, the motivational speaker, although he says he doesn't consider himself a motivational speaker, wherein he talks about prisoners who were kidnapped and how the people can reason with them and basically get them to go along with the program. And there is something called the Stockholm Syndrome, where the captured will take on the characteristics of the captors. And so let's see. So anyway, they early on they talked about a lot of the unrest in the college campuses in the 60s. And I believe they mentioned that some kids had been killed and certainly in Kent State, which was not in California, where Ronald Reagan was the governor at the time of this incident. But, that there certainly was a lot of student protests in the 60s about the Vietnam War and so forth. Let's see. And I'm going to try not to say too much. I've been criticized for that. So maybe I'll just kind of pause instead of saying that. But I'll make maybe just a slight sound. I don't know if that'll be a little better. But let's see. So they showed one of the founding members of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Now, I'm old enough to remember when this stuff happened, and I just thought Symbionese, I'm mispronouncing it, was from some foreign country or something, but they explained, and I forgot the particulars, but how they came up with the name, and then they had a symbol of a cobra with 7 heads, which ironically in the book of Revelation, it talks about the 7 churches and some beast in Revelation. But at any rate, let's see. Let's see here, just trying to adjust this. Let's see. So anyway, so they had the Symbionese Liberation Army. She was kidnapped, and one of the Harris, I think his name was Harris, had said that I think it might have either been Harris, one of the founders of the SLA, or Mr. West, who was a teacher of hers and was fooling with her before she was of age, and then married her when she became 18. And it showed where, well, someone had said that Patty's daddy was embarrassed to say that he didn't have the money, and they had asked him for $400 million, and he agreed to $2 million to help the poor folks have something to eat. Later, they showed where Mr. Hearst did say he just didn't have the funds and he's done the best he can. Then the film went on to explain that there was a group of managers who had handled the Hearst fortune, which means apparently that the rich grandfather had passed. Because as I was listening to a lot of this, I was wondering, well, had the grandfather passed? If the daddy didn't have the money, couldn't they get it from, I mean, if the daddy didn't have the money, couldn't they get it from the granddaddy? Apparently he had passed. And then I wondered, well, didn't they pass that down to the granddaddy? But then later that was explained that they had this group of managers that was handling the money, and it was thought that they wouldn't be willing to part with a lot of the money. Of course, they didn't make it clear whether Patty's daddy had really pressed them to ask for the money. They just said that they weren't hardly going to give up much money, which reminds me right here in Washington, D.C., we had the late owner of the professional Washington football team, Jack Kent Cooke, who owned a lot of other things and was said to be one of the richer NFL owners. I forgot whether they said he owned the Lakers or at least the Felt Forum where the Lakers used to play, that he had put in a lot, if not all of the money for the first Ali Frazier fight, $2.5 million each, which was unheard of at that time. And closed circuit TV helped to boost the money into that stratosphere. That was the technology that was available then. And so what would happen is people would go to a theater or someplace, pay their money, and watch. Now, I understand that even in some of the old-timey days that existed, but apparently not to this level. And so Mr. Cooke was a very wealthy man. Now, so what wound up happening was, I think his son could not get the funds to buy the football team when the daddy had passed. There was also an issue about whether one of Cooke's sons would get any money to help him survive at one point too. But so his sons were not able to keep the football team, which led to Daniel Snyder owning the football team. So this concept is something that I've heard of before. So let's see. So they said that Ronald Reagan was the governor of California at the time, and a younger fellow was telling me about how they ridiculed Reagan, but it was still known that he was indeed a governor of the largest state in America. He was also the president of the Screen Actors Guild. So it was not the same So the media may have ridiculed him a bit as an actor. I think Senator Edward M. Kennedy had called him a B-list actor because he was trying to get the nomination on the Democratic side and lost, but to James Earl Carter. And so let's see. I'm sorry to be saying I've been criticized for that, but I'm just trying to collect my thoughts here. Let's see. So I was talking about, Ronald Reagan. Because I was wondering as I was watching this, and they were saying about getting this food for the poor, why would the poor even accept this? I mean, I understand people need food, but even the poor could maybe take a stand and say, well, look, we don't want food that comes to us because, this lady is held hostage, even if they are poor. So they showed where there were basically, I don't know whether it was strong enough to call it a riot, but some unruly behavior when they were distributing the food. And they said, well, they were just throwing the food at the people. But they said that Reagan, at one point, and they played a clip, it said he hopes everyone gets botulism that accepts this food. Then later, he stated that the people should not accept this food, which, was what I was wondering and was thinking about as the narrative was going on. So they said that Patty Hearst thought that her daddy was not trying hard enough to get her release, because her daddy had said that that he didn't have the money. And then they were saying that she had also said that her mother should stop wearing a black dress because she wasn't dead yet, which makes me think of a very lovely Ethiopian co-worker, and how she would say that she was married, but then she would say, but she's not dead, and she had once told me, says, well, if I give her my email address, this would let her know that I truly have the computer. And my thought was, I don't need to prove nothing to you, but I probably would have been better off if I would have opened up that line of communication. She was very buxom, shapely, and pretty. I don't guess it's wrong to mention her name. I'm sure there are other people with the same name. Her name was Circlem, and we called her Cirky. And anyway, so Patty was just saying that, well, she wasn't dead yet. And eventually she made some recordings saying that she was not being forced, and she felt that her dad was not doing all he could to get her released, which has me wondering, I wonder whether she was aware that her grandfather's fortune, because he was the one owning a media empire, and her dad was just an executive, and the film said that he was basically just a figurehead, and he, had that job because of his father, her grandfather. But I wonder whether she assumed that he had inherited all of that money, or whether she was aware that he did not inherit that money outright, and that there was a board of managers. And maybe that's why the creator of this film was saying that they would present the facts and let the public decide whether she was a willing participant or not. So my recollection is that they definitely showed her on TV, involved with bank robberies and just all sorts of mischief is probably too small of a word in terms of the magnitude, just basically involved in a lot of crime. And it was like just totally bizarre. And people were wondering, was she truly a willing participant? And that's what they're asking now. But they did show where she said her pop didn't do all that he could to get her freedom. And so let's see what else about this Patty Hearst business. Unless something else pops in my mind, I think that's about it. Now, I did see a little clip of on ESPN Steve McNair, who had came out of Alcorn State, a small black college, and they said this was the first time that I think they said that a black college had had a player be selected number 3 in the first round. Now, I think Doug, and that he was in the running for the Heisman Trophy. Now, Doug Williams went to Grambling, and I believe he was selected in the first round too. And I understand that he was a candidate for the Heisman Trophy as well. Now, I noticed with this latest Super Bowl where Tom Brady and the Patriots lost to the Eagles, that they were showing some backup quarterbacks that played in the Super Bowl, and they mentioned Doug Williams, and they said that he only played in 5 games after that. Now, he turned out to have a bad back, and he had criticized Joe Gibbs, who I believe must have been an offensive coordinator when he played for Tampa Bay. And I understand that Doug, at that time, was one of the first players to amass 5,000, was it 5,000 yards in his first 5 years, which doesn't really seem like that much because even then I think Joe Namath had done 4,000 in 1 year. But at any rate, that he was third on the list for the amount of yards in 5 years. I had called up to the sports junkies, and they looked him up. I believe it was a sports, or it might have been Peter Rosenberg, but anyway, a sports talk show. And they looked up his information on the internet, and they were like, well, his completion rate wasn't that good, but his coach, John McKay, had him throwing downfield a lot. Doug had a very strong arm, but it was later said that he was more accurate than Jay Schrader, who had played ahead of him with the Washington Redskins. So I only glanced at a clip of the profile on ESPN about Air McNair. And just from my recollection, the guy did play in the Super Bowl, I believe. And then that was mentioned too that he made, but I didn't hang around long enough to get the details. But I do remember he definitely played in the Super Bowl. I believe he played against Kurt Warner, and I believe he was within about 1 yard of actually scoring the winning touchdown. And then tragically later, Steve McNair was a black man, and he was, I don't know whether he was cheating on his wife, but he was involved with a non-black woman and lost his life tragically. Let's see what else is going on. I did watch. So, like I said, I'm finished with what I had to say about Patty Hearst, unless something else pops into my mind, and that's why I'm just speaking on some other things as well. They let's see. Oh, the Cavaliers played today, and this is the first time that the various players that were traded for played, and they smashed the Boston Celtics. So that's a good start for LeBron James and the Cavaliers. Now, the CNN mentioned they're going to have something on the Kennedys. I did a review of Jackie, which I deleted because nobody watched it. And speaking of sports, I also did a video of, it's called Chuck, and then I made a notation that he had fought Ali. And I just, next to this one, I put out one called Van Jones Comments on Ali Talk, where I was just basically saying how Van Jones said that some player had got some players together and got some money for causes. And he said that not even Ali, as great as he was, had done that. And I just felt that that was an unfair and unnecessary slap at Ali. Ali personally gave a lot of money, and these players had stopped their protests in exchange for the NFL to give some money to some charities and communities. It's almost like Judas Iscariot selling out for 30 pieces of silver. So I don't know that that is so laudable to the extent that you got to throw shade at Muhammad Ali. And I think that what Ali had done in terms of being an example of courage and manhood is far more important than these guys securing some money. Jesus and the Bible say that the poor you have with you always, because they say, well, this perfume that the lady was putting on his feet could have been used for the poor. And like with Ali, he stood up, he didn't back up, he didn't back down, and he lost 4 prime years of his athletic prowess. And then he was resilient enough to come back. He was an overcomer enough to overcome extreme odds, going up what seemed to be an invincible George Foreman and getting his title back. So I was not pleased with Van Jones' comment. So please check out that video. So far, nobody's watching that either. I don't know if anybody will watch this, but I'm in here plugging away. So I think that's about all that I have to say. I think I mentioned that CNN is going to have something on the Kennedys. And like I said, I did a review of Jackie, and I deleted it because nobody watched it. Oh, now for you sports fan, I did do ESPN Baltimore Boys, which does have over 1,000 views. And I talk about Mayor Marion Barry. I talk about the 3 ball players from Baltimore that played in the NBA. And I think you'll enjoy it. Check it out. Trying to cut this sucker off. Dog.